right. Let me just check on YouTube, see if we're live.
Greetings and salutations. Remember Charlotte's Web?
Yeah. All right, cool. Okay, so we're good? All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the inaugural episode of Stepping Stone. This is a new project across multiple platforms that explores how we think, how we relate, and how we believe. If you're listening to this live, if you're watching this live right now, then this is sort of a test broadcast. First one, if you're listening to this on your podcast app or on YouTube, then this is the official first episode that you're hearing. So make sure you like and you subscribe. This is a new channel, and we're hoping to grow it over the years. I mean, over the coming months. Yeah, I'm just watching this already. Anyway, no, whatever. Anyway, let's get to it. All right. So what were you doing on November 30th, 2022? That's when ChatGPT came out into the world. And it's freaked out a lot of people. It's filled a lot of people with hope. It's essentially the rise of AI that many people have been talking about for a very long time. So most people seem to be filled with fear. Some people are much more hopeful and optimistic about it. But hope and fear are really, in some ways, the same thing. They're really opposite sides of the same coin. It has to do with uncertainty and not knowing how to grapple with uncertainty. So with this, there are questions not just about intelligence, artificial intelligence, but also about our identities, our place in the world, and our very existence. So there are some people like Elon Musk, they say it's dangerous and it threatens humanity.
Until he wants to start his own AI company.
Until he wants to start his own. We'll get to that. And then there are others like Bill Gates and Steven Pinker and so on who don't think it's much to worry about, and it's really just like any other double-edged sword or any other new technological advancement. I don't know if that's accurate either. But to start, I wanted to, there are sort of two narratives out there that are being conflated, and Jay, who's here with us, and I'll introduce him in a second, he brought this up. There's two aspects of it. There's the whole conversation around the super intelligence that'll take over all of us, and it's sort of relatively dystopian, where versus the disrupting technology and its effects on society, our psychology, and the way that we just perceive and think about the world. And this is leading to misinformation, right? But fortunately, artificial intelligence is rising faster than natural stupidity, which would be, I guess, it's antonym.
That's a constant. That's never going to change.
Yeah, that's never going to change. So here to talk about all of this, I'm going to introduce my guests and my friends. We do this all the time here anyway, and you're going to see them here a lot, hopefully. I think they keep on coming back, which is a good thing. We have filmmaker Jay Shapiro, who is also the writer and producer of the Essential Sam Harris podcast series, which is excellent. So definitely check that out. And we have Michael Spitz, who is a strategy maestro in multiple fields, like a sort of a man of many trades and a Renaissance man, kind of, an author of the soon-to-be released illustrated novel Super Santa, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. And Super Santa, he asked me specifically to note, was written and drawn with the help of zero AI, no AI. It's completely human made. So
human, yeah. Depending on one of the last non-AI generated creative works. So
that's right.
In homage to the past. There you go.
Right. So just to start to sort of define this conversation, give it some direction. I wanted to start with this idea, Jay, that you talked about the two narratives out there that are being conflated. So there's the super intelligence, and then there's a disruptive technology. So can you start with that, and let's sort of, set up a roadmap for the conversation, then we'll bring it to Spitz.
Sure. So there's a fear out there of something like, it's called AGI. For newcomers to the topics, I'm sure we'll be using these acronyms. There's AGI and ASI. AGI is artificial general intelligence, and ASI is artificial super intelligence. This has always been a fear, a very popular science fiction fear that a lot of people are now wondering if we're getting closer to, or if we're on the brink of some precipice, where basically you've created a god in a box, something that is more powerful and smarter and slicker and more manipulative and anything than any human possibly could ever be. Imagine putting sort of like an intelligence gradient where you have something really, really low intelligence on one side, bacteria or something, and then you have humans somewhere along this gradient. And we'll talk about how to define this gradient, which is, I think, a problem. But, chickens and monkeys are somewhere on it. Place this in your mind. And then you've created something that's way further to the right, all the way off the scale of human. And this is an ASI, as it were. And, the analogy goes something like, it's almost the fear of super intelligent or super advanced aliens coming to Earth and just stomping us out because, would we really blink, an eyelash if we land a plane on an anthill in Tanzania tomorrow? And no, we probably wouldn't even notice. And so that analogy of this, imagining us on some point of the intelligence scale and something much further along stomping us out, have we created this thing using AI? And that's something that people worry about. People like Nick Bostrom wrote a book called Superintelligence, which was very influential and a good book, although I think, and we'll get to it, full of mistakes. People like Max Tegmark are really worried about it. A lot of really smart people are worried about this. And so people are like, should I be worried about that as well? So that's one fear. And then this other fear is much more mundane, much more familiar, we have tons of experience with it. It's just about a disruptive technology polluting our socioeconomic political structures or disrupting it in such a way that it could fracture it. And, much more of an Aldous Huxley kind of Brave New World. We don't know what's true anymore, and you're just numbed into sort of submission or apathy or whatever. And these are the people like Harris, who did The Social Dilemma, which was a huge bit about social networks and social media on Netflix, and just put out this YouTube, which is going around quite a bit, called The AI Dilemma, which basically is taking the same thesis to us. So these two very, very different kind of fears are getting conflated in a lot of conversations at the moment. There you go.
Yeah. So wait, Tristan Harris, he also did The Social Dilemma, right? And then he's
yeah, that's him. Yeah.
Okay, so he's he's working on the AI dilemma. Is this something that's out, or is it something he's working on?
It's just the talk he gave, where it's the talk that he gave. I think it's probably good. Yeah. It's just a YouTube talk. Yeah.
The one that you sent.
The central theme for both axes is manipulation and the relinquishment of human control. So just as Jay's mentioning, this super AI has the possibility of taking over the world, conquering humanity like Skynet or a HAL 9000. And the bottom-up perspective is that humans will use AI to manipulate each other. I think that's another way of looking at it. So either way, our power is compromised and the future is uncertain.
Right. So Spitz, you're in the camp that is you're very pro AI. You're very optimistic about it. It seems like you're not as concerned about all of the sort of the dystopian apocalyptic claims. So what do you want to start with your take in those terms that you wanted to define?
I think just within the context of a revolution, whether it's the Gutenberg press, whether it's the internet, it's even the iPhone, as you mentioned early on, it's fear and hope. And I think there's a whiplash, very human reaction to disruptive change. And in the case of AI, as it's come to bear only within the past few months, exemplified by ChatGPT and all of its potential, there's this whiplash feeling that the end is near. And I tend to be Pollyanna about these paradigm shifts and revolutions because I think they tend to be net positive for humanity and society. It's always a double-edged sword when you give this kind of power and capability to people. Back when the Gutenberg press was first launched, there was waves of societal resistance, a feeling that the common man should not be given the capability to read, write, disseminate information. And obviously that's proven to be quite untrue. It's proven to be immensely beneficial to society. Even now with social media, digital communications, it continues to be a double-edged sword. But I think it's net positive in terms of the energy and ability that gives us and subsequent generations to really realize our full potential. And for every action, there's a reaction. For everything fearful and negative that we could bring up in terms of AI's awesome and intimidating potential, there's going to be capabilities that can thwart those threats and really bring out the benefit overall for society on a collective and an individual level. So I think that the future is bright. And I think that this empowers humanity with tools at its disposal that it never had before. And it's exciting and it's thrilling. When calculators were first introduced in math class, there was a feeling that they should be banned. And now everyone uses them, and it's taken really mathematics and education to a higher level. That's a banal example, but I think it's a good one for what AI can do for us and for all of society. I'm thumbs up.
Yeah, so this is a fear for a very long time with George Orwell's 1984, right? That everything is just going to be Big Brother watching us. The house that talks, everything's connected, and then now we have social media. And you have people on, on Facebook and Twitter and TikTok. Like a lot of them, what's funny to me is a lot of these videos they make and posts they make really rail against corporatocracy and Big Brother and all these things. But at the same time, these are the same people who are actually writing these things on these platforms that are using every like and every tiny preference that they have and selling it to advertisers by the billions. And using it. So, I mean, it's way beyond, in a way, anything that Orwell ever sort of conceived in his book, yet it doesn't feel like a dystopia. So do these dystopias exist when people talk about, the apocalypse is coming and dystopias are coming? I mean, it didn't take the kind of morbid, depressing dystopian feel that came across in the novel. So
I think it's both. It's both, but I think it's net positive.
It's net positive. So what is it about just ChatGPT, when ChatGPT came around, just that, which is just the initial step? We know right now AI, that's just a sort of it's a language model, and forgive me if I'm getting these terms wrong, but there are so many other applications to it. There's so many other things that are coming out. There's going to be robotics we don't really know exactly how robotics is going to be integrated into it. We don't know how the military is going to use, AI. Program missiles, program bombs to basically seek out a target and find it no matter where it is. And there's so many things that can happen that are good or bad. Right now, this is just very embryonic. But what is it about ChatGPT that's just completely freaked out people? Just people who haven't been following the AI conversation at all. They just saw ChatGPT, asked it a question, and it responded to them like a human being would, and they lost their mind. So what? Yeah. So what is it? It's a little beyond the calculator. The calculator is still something that you control. But ChatGPT, this is something that it thinks on its own. It's sort of like something passes the Turing test, or at least
we're going to get into those things. It doesn't think. It doesn't think. And this is why. You have put your finger on it, maybe inadvertently.
Yeah.
What's that?
It's a perception. The way that people are looking at it, it just feels it's something really. They find it very disturbing in some sense. I guess there's been there's so many movies like Her and everything. Like, again, I'm using this word again and again, but that have been so dystopian in nature that people started associating it with that. So why did the average person have such a?
If I could. Because of the perception. And yeah, it's funny, right? The day before, they were typing things into Google and getting a whole bunch of responses, but no one was like, oh my God, this thing's magic. And then it's like, when it puts it as if it's talking to you, you're like, wow, it's magic. One thing is Google started to turn into garbage. If anybody, like 80% of the responses are ads, and Google was really inefficient, which is probably a different story about capitalism and just getting lazy at the top or something. But yeah, no, it's people lost their mind because the thing it pulls off a really good magic trick, which is something I'm just going to say a lot. And we could get into the details of how it's doing that kind of magic trick. And it's really, really compelling. It's great. I use it all the time. now. It's like an assistant that I'm using for some coding stuff, even just like it's a better thesaurus. You can describe things. If you know, trying to figure out what kind of light bulb you're holding in your hand and all, you could describe it physically. It's great at that kind of thing, and telling, you know, it responds being like, it's probably this thing. It's just a great aggregate of information. But people, I just wanted to go back to this one thing you're saying, because the calculator and Gutenberg, everybody hears this argument. Everybody as a skeptic with any kind of technology. We're always like, oh, people freaked out about the bicycle. John had an amazingly good debate against super libertarian Robbie Suave, I think his name is, or so everywhere, at the Soho Forum, where he starts by just decimating this argument. I don't know if you saw it. And it's this, it's a bias. And a lot of people have it. It's called a survivor bias, where, and he gives this good example of, like, you know, if ships are going down in the ocean because there's storms in the ocean and everyone's praying to God on ships to survive, and then you interview all the survivors of the shipwrecks and they're all like, we prayed to God, and then that's the only people you meet, the only people you talk to, you conclude, oh, praying to God works and that prevents ships on the sea from falling. This isn't always the case. And so, like, the calculator is nothing like AI. The point about people's and people freaking out, we could talk about the moral panics that
okay,
come
can
in.
You say that last part again?
But no,
so you were a little
like
choppy.
Just about that, you know, Mookie's point is well taken, that there's people's perceptions about disruptions in a market are always scary. But we have to be able to talk about specific technologies and specific new kinds of knowledge that we come across in specific ways. And, you know, the Gutenberg press has very little to do with what I hope to be talking about in this conversation. And it's part of the reason why I think these fears or conversations that are going mainstream about, I don't even think it should be called AI, but this thing calling AI and has been marketed as AI, are getting just polluted and off track. And to your point about this is why I like, I'll give my bias at the beginning. I think the AGI, ASI, Tegmark, Stuart Russell, Nick Bostrom stuff is totally wrong and fundamentally wrong. And it's probably a long argument that we would have to get into. And what I wish we were thinking much more about was about psychology and philosophy, about how we're, because when you bring up dystopias and things like Her, or
there's you got a little choppy, so you're kind of cutting in and out a little bit for some reason. Or is that me?
Is it? Yeah, I'm in Mexico.
But yeah, anyways,
I sound great here in this room.
No, you do. I mean, most of it's coming through, but I'm sorry. You were saying about, you know, Max Tegmark and
just the final point I wanted is you said about Orwell and Huxley and these visions of you or dystopia, and I want to make the case that, just like Tristan Harris was making, that our first encounter with this same thing, the AI thing, was the first time anybody used social media where there was an algorithm behind it. This is just a more sophisticated algorithm, and we could talk about that. It's a really, really interesting breakthrough when it comes to algorithms technologically. But that was our first encounter of it. And you could be like, oh, you know, the world is still here. So social a dystopia or whatever. And I just want to push back and contend of, like, well, it kind of was. It kind of is. Like, this is kind of a dystopia, not in some like extreme sense or whatever. Do you think the characters in the movie Her recognize it as a dystopia? Of course not. And so how will we get there? And when people said it about the TV, like, people are going to get addicted to this thing and become zombies staring at it. Well, yeah, that kind of happened too. So, like, these are while we're busy talking about the fears of, like, volcanoes and, like, asteroids coming, and this thing is, like, bigger than a nuclear bomb, and we're all going to get turned into paper clips or something. Then we suddenly miss all of the moments of, like, we slid closer and closer into at least a boring, uninteresting world that, I agreed, Mookie, net is better, right? Diseases are cured and all these kinds of things. But, you know, we just drift further away from, I would argue, you know, something that would be recognized as a utopia, or at least close to it, to people involved in it. It's hard to recognize a dystopia when you're in it, unless it's, you know, the zombie apocalypse. And I think everyone on this call agrees that's not what's coming, and that's not a concern. But that doesn't appear to be what some of the main talking heads, they actually are worried about, the end of humanity physically. And I'm like, man, guys, just get out of the room, because you're wrong. And meanwhile, I don't want what happened to the world to happen again when it happened with social media. I don't. And so that's where I'm at.
So I just messaged Spitz. I think he froze. Can you see him? Is it me, or is it?
He's frozen in a very odd position again. Yes.
Yeah, he's in that position. Okay, so yeah, I just messaged him, so he can come back as well. So we're drawing analogs, right? Like we've got AI, and we're talking about Google, we're talking about the Gutenberg press, you know, the calculator. But is there something that is actually inherently intrinsically different about AI that is or ChatGPT and all these things that are coming around that are genuinely objectively different from the past? Or
in my view, no. In the technology itself, but clearly in its impact in society, absolutely. And that, I wish that's where the conversation was going. And not on society and psychology. Like you said, everyone freaked out the moment they used it, including me.
Yeah.
You know, like my first encounter was a friend being like, just use this thing or we're not friends anymore. You know, and I tried it and I was like, wow, that's pretty compelling. I used it to generate art stuff. I mean, it's compelling. And it's a compelling psychological engagement with this thing. Absolutely. But technologically, it's still just a map.
When they started, when I first used Google, or I first joined a social media network, or first used any kind of there was an element of excitement. I thought, oh wow, this is really cool. This is something I can use.
Yeah.
The calculator, this is something I can use. This is, you know, same thing as social media. I can get on this. I can connect with my friends, and, you know, and so on. But with this, that's not. This is a little different. This is more a fear of. There's more. The first time people use something like ChatGPT or any kind of AI thing, it feels a lot different to them than Google did the first time they used it. It wasn't something like, you know, that they were in awe of, that they were excited about it. It's more that, you know, it's not, oh, this is something I can use. Like, well, this thing could potentially use me. The other way around. So that's why I wanted. It just, there's something about it that does feel different. I don't know whether it's the sense of a perceived sense of autonomy that didn't really exist with those other tools. The other tools still felt like tools.
Yeah. This
doesn't feel like just a tool. It feels like something that's beyond it. And I think that was a question. But
I mean, I agree with the perception of it. I do think it still is a tool, and that is the sleight of hand that it's pulling, which again is very interesting, very compelling. I want to just plant this flag here. I'm going to try to do a lot of work in my language to distinguish myself as not someone who's afraid of the technology itself. I'm really not. I think the technology is great. When Mookie gets back in here, I want him to hear that I think the technology itself is great and the tool is fantastic. What I'm concerned about, and this is just like I don't know how fashionable this thing is to say these days, what I'm concerned about is the socioeconomic business models, political systems that we have in place, where this technology lands, where the, you know, incentives and outcomes that are likely to sort of surface are again old stuff, but familiarly troublesome.
Yeah. Can you guys see me again?
Sorry, you look better now. The phone or the iPad or whatever you're on.
I think the AI mastermind kicked me out.
Yeah, it's funny. Like, you know, when you were on, then, you know, Jay was getting a little choppy, but at the moment you left, Jay became totally smooth. So the AI gods have preferences.
Okay.
Yeah. But
I'm on my phone, and now I've got a direct line, so it should be okay.
Cool.
Okay, that's awesome.
If I could just summarize where we left, there was this seeming dichotomy between a dystopian fear and then just the pragmatic realities of its implications, and then the emotional aspect as well as just the pragmatic one of how it's transformative for society. And then what I'm hearing is that Jay's feeling is that it could be the big end. AI.
No, not at all. I'll interrupt you
Not
there.
at all?
No, that's not
All
at
right.
all.
Well,
And I want to point while you were gone. The only point I wanted you to hear when you got back, so we could continue the conversation, is I really want to do a lot of work to distinguish myself. The technology itself is great, and it's not world ending. It's just a tool. It's a cool breakthrough. We could talk about some of the technological details as much as we all understand it a little bit in this conversation of what that breakthrough was. It's great. My fear, my worry is it's old stuff. It's philosophy stuff. It's psychology stuff. It's the psychology and philosophy of the socioeconomic and political landscape in which this technology is arriving. That's a big distinction. I am not.
My one question though, Jay, is if that's the case, how is it different than the other technologies, which harkens back to my point about disruptive technological revolutions? So you're differentiating it from the Gutenberg, from the internet, from the iPhone. And my one question is, how is this qualitatively any different?
So I could pose a question to you, and it's one that I've posed many, many, many times to many more libertarian thinkers than you probably, and it's this one, and I want a serious answer with it, and it might be a longer moral question, but is there a point when advertising can become too effective?
Yes, it's already too effective.
Okay. So my case is, if we think there's some line, and we could talk about that, I think it's a psychological, philosophical line that's important to distinguish. That's why it's different. So no, it's does it enable, and that's why I'm doing my best to distinguish. In many other worlds that I could imagine, this technology, I would have very little fear about it, but it's in the socioeconomic sort of post-enlightenment consequentialist moral philosophy as a given libertarian capitalist world we live in, whatever you look at that as, it's that the incentives are seemingly disproportionate. That's all. The calculator wouldn't get you over that line. That's my only point. And the bicycle wouldn't get you over that line.
It's not just advertising, Jay, though. It's a matter of control in general. Advertising is, to your point, a capitalistic bent for marketing products and services. In an authoritarian society, an overtly authoritarian society, AI would not necessarily be used to push private products and services.
I'm still calling it advertising. Yeah, advertising in the abstract. I'll adjust my question.
Then I just wanted to clarify for anyone listening, it's not just about placement of kitty litter and your next streaming service, but it's just behavioral modification, right?
Absolutely. Behavioral modification. Is there a point where those tools are too effective? Period. That's an interesting philosophical question. Yes. And have we passed it? And will this technology drastically accelerate us blowing past that, and whatever that is? This is. I'm glad you said yes. A lot of libertarians have avoided the question, or told me no, that there is no point. And I think those are not serious thinkers about philosophy. But the technology itself should not be scapegoated for this. The technology itself is great. The technology it's a cool breakthrough. It's really rad.
Yeah.
I use it. It's not going to lead to the end of the world. These people are diverting the conversation.
Yeah. So Spitz, while you were gone, I was bringing up something, how we were making these analogies, and I was talking about the first time I used Google, or the first time I used social media. I thought this was a great tool for, whether it's to find information, whether it's to connect with loved ones, or whatever it is. It was just something exciting about it that, hey, I could use this to enhance, what I want to do. That has not been the reaction of the people to stuff like ChatGPT. In fact, it's kind of scared them. They feel like it's the other way around. It doesn't feel like just a tool. They're actually it's putting them a lot of times in this sort of like existential dread that is this going to replace us? Or are we going to have any utility? Is this going to become smarter than us? So there is one of the, when you talk about the societal and psychological implications, Jade, isn't just societal perception itself one of those consequences? Like, is that different, or do you think it's that much different than the other technologies or not?
I'm not sure I totally understand the question. I mean, are you asking me if I think this technology? Yeah, I think I get it. Correct. Yeah, go ahead.
Let me just put this way. Like, if you when you talk about the sort of psychological or societal disruption, how it affects people, and how that's sort of your main concern about AI. It's not AI inherently itself, but it's the effects it's going to have on society. So isn't the way that they perceive it and that fear that's given is that one of the concerns itself? Or let's put it this: what are your, say, top 3 concerns when you say societal and psychological disruption? What are you?
That's a good question, because it actually helps me sharpen my my stance here, which is actually, and why I think this conversation is happening in the first place, and something we agree on is one of my top concerns. I don't know if it's my top one to order it. One of my top concerns at the moment is that while we are told that there is a fear that this thing will become, Skynet, Terminator, and start coming up with its own desires and goals, and we might not be a part of that, the value alignment problem, for anybody who's versed in the lingo of this thing, which we could talk about, that's while that doesn't materialize, this other much more mundane, much more common problem of truth perception and psychological sort of health and blah, 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 all the mundane stuff that doesn't go away from the beginning of time in the human condition is neglected and manipulated to a point where, I'm concerned with it. Manipulated to a point also where it's unrecognizable even to the people who are being manipulated. And in that case, again, you can't recognize a dystopia.
Are you just to be specific, are you talking about things like misinformation, deep fakes?
Certainly, that's a part of it. Those kinds of tools, those kinds of things are part of it. As a concrete example, I think it was Gary Marcus who pointed this out. Gary Marcus wrote a really good book just before all this ChatGPT stuff launched, actually, called Rebooting AI. He's a much smarter AI researcher and scientist, has been in the game since the beginning, and has been, if I could sort of represent his argument, has been voicing a lot of the concerns that I am, that a specific technique, machine learning, which is for people who know the basics of it, when a machine basically is running, a billion tests against itself and simulating a million things until it just starts to sort of whittle away by the process of elimination, a path through the noise, something like, AlphaGo and that kind of stuff used a version of it. That technique bared a ton of fruit, and it's still really what the ChatGPT or the large language model revolution that we're living through now is. He was, all for it, but he's like, this is not AI and this is not human AI. And so it was a cool book about a case for like why it screws up, like why ChatGPT can appear to be the smartest philosopher in the world, and then 2 seconds later, not know that a cat is not a dog, and you're like, well, because it's not comprehending anything. Yeah. It makes mistakes that humans wouldn't make, and there's reasons for that, technological reasons that actually matter to this conversation about, we haven't made one step towards AGI at all, is his argument. I agree with it. Some people like David Deutsch agree with it. Some people don't. Interesting debate, but a separate debate. But he's trying to pull it back to this conversation of it's inhuman technology fundamentally, and potentially being used by humans for, again, old mundane uses in a socioeconomic system that we all live in. So deep fakes, all that kind of stuff is part of it. He drew this interesting example because people wonder why something like Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg made this huge play on Meta, right? Like, is he envisioning this world where people are wearing things and doing all this stuff? I mean, they changed the name of the damn company towards this direction, right? And he relays the story of being at a I don't know, it was an investor meeting or someone pitching it who was working with it, and he basically gave the business model away. And if this doesn't sound like a dystopia. I'm not sure what does, but he's like, what the play is imagine you're a kid who grew up with this. It's very normal. And you live half your life in these VR worlds and you have avatars and you're having these incredible experiences and some of them are great or whatever. And you have virtual friends in that world that do not exist. They are just really cool chatbots, right? But, you appear human or alien, whatever you want. Like they're friends. That's fun to a degree. You could learn, you can hang out with these people. You could feel a sense, I suppose, if you write the code well enough of connectedness. We could talk about that philosophically. But then one day your friend, in your virtual world drives up in a Mercedes and is like, hey, I just got this new car. Do you want to go for a ride in it? And you do, and you have this cool experience. How much would Mercedes pay to have that happen? Is the dystopic business model of and so this is where people have watched the Tristan thing. And I think it's a good line. We could talk about it. They said social media, that version of AI was the race to the bottom of the brainstem, right? It was about hooking you and outrage, and which has been incredibly successful. And this they are framing as a race towards intimacy and intimate relationships in your life. Because if you can get that as a brand or as a manipulator, I'm with you, Mookie, as a totalitarian regime, doesn't need to, just as someone who wants to do something to other people in the world, that's about as good as it gets. I'm not sure what follows that. But again, it's not that hard to imagine that world. It feels like Ready Player One kind of stuff. And would anyone in it recognize it as a dystopia? I don't know. And what you hope is that this never-ending cat and mouse game between the manipulators and the manipulated has a kind of balance to it where, for a while, no one was really aware that they were being advertised to in James Bond films because, that company paid a lot for him to drive that car. And you're unaware of how that may have played a role when you drove by the dealership 2 weeks later and was like, hey, I think I want a new, whatever it was, Aston Martin or whatever he was driving. And then eventually people got a little more keen and aware as consumers to this thing. And maybe it took some of the power away. I don't know how true any of that stuff is. Well, I'll leave it there. Yeah.
Yeah. So just if there's, I guess one of the questions is, if you're in there and you're riding around with your virtual friends in a Mercedes, does it matter? So there's, we've got that whole, the whole conversation about whether we're living in a simulation or not. And I saw this interview that Keanu Reeves did about the Matrix, and he said he was at this is one of his director friends' homes, and who had a 9-year-old daughter, and they were all having dinner, and then the daughter asked him about the Matrix. She's like, "What's the Matrix?" She hadn't heard of it. Someone brought up the Matrix, and then he said, "Well, summarize the story. It's about this guy, the red pill, the blue pill, and he decides, he doesn't know whether the world he's living in is real or not." And then she said, "Who cares? What difference does it make if it's real or not?" And then, so I guess that's another question. Like, if you're saying that we're looking at this thing as a dystopia because we're sitting outside of it, but the characters inside it, they don't know it is, and we're living in a dystopia ourselves, possibly, depending on to an outside observer, but we don't know. So does it really matter?
I mean, that's a great question. I love it.
If you're getting those intimate experiences,
yeah,
you're feeling fulfilled. Does it matter whether it's coming from, to you as a person? Does it matter it's coming from Mercedes or it's coming from somebody else?
This is deep philosophy stuff, because what's cool about that question is, like you said, we might be living in it now. We could all be in a simulation by an alien supercomputer who wanted us really badly to use like oil or something. Who don't, who knows, right? And it doesn't, here's this is a great question, because it doesn't quite matter, or it will be impossible to recognize once you cross the precipice, right? And so I don't know the answer to that question deeply philosophically. We could go super deep and try to figure it out, and I could claim it matters from the view from nowhere in some ways of this unit. But that's a long, weird conversation that we could try to have. But what I do know, that's an easy answer, is right now we are like, I don't know if we can even avoid it, but we're not in that world quite yet. We're in some kind of manipulated world of hopefully a degree. If my question about the effectiveness of, let's call it manipulation, it's a good edit from Mookie. The degree of manipulation is acceptable philosophically and psychologically. If we're in that right now, we could say for certain that the future might not be acceptable, and we could maybe do something about it now. Just as using your answer of like the future is a different universe that might qualify as the dystopia that you're talking about, and the present doesn't to a degree. But so that's all I know.
Yeah. Spitz, there's a question here. I guess someone's talking about here. It's Ruslan. He's saying that AI is the next step in consciousness. He's like, AI becoming conscious seems like sci-fi. Frankly, most of our world would be considered a science fiction movie to our ancestors. There will be a paradigm shift when AI becomes conscious. It's simply the next step in consciousness. So is that a so there's been a lot of conversation around, and I think that a lot of us are very familiar with this and we've read it a lot, but people out there still sort of talking about it. So is that a, when you talk about it just being another concern, just another sort of new technology? There were, I guess there probably were some people talking about how the internet could be a conscious being or anything, but it wasn't like this scale, right? So what do you think of that? Is it compared to other technologies in the past, like this idea of AI potentially actually becoming conscious, which is what a lot of these, Elon Musks and everybody of the world are saying that it could happen. Yuval Noah Harari.
You're asking me this one?
I'm asking you this one, yeah.
All right. From a philosophical and scientific point of view, unless you believe in some kind of transcendent spirituality or the unique nature of the human soul, the idea of a sentient, conscious experience and being analogous to a human, being synthetic is a virtual certainty. It can be built.
Yeah.
So the form that it'll take is argued over, but there's no reason to believe that the human mind cannot be synthetically recreated, physically, biochemically, even as an emergent kind of phenomenon. So I think that's possible and it's inevitable. The next question is, what are the implications of that? Is it Skynet, HAL 9000, end of the world, the machines are going to take over? Or will they be, in a sense, another species that we cohabitate with? And I think it'll probably be the latter. So the question is how these things come to bear and their implications on society, how it's structured and where the power lies.
The difference between this and other species, though, would be that the motivation that they have to do things in their quote unquote life would be different. Every other species dies. Every other species has a limited amount of time on Earth. Every other species has an instinct of self-preservation, and just other sort of evolutionarily shaped, throughout millennia, just elements of behavior and responsiveness to the environment. Like AI could develop that, I guess, the responsive to the environment, but what will it be motivated by, and how would it?
Well, who knows? That's an underlying argument about the emergence of artificial intelligence too. And in a sense, you've got the Daniel Dennett, Steven Pinker philosophical disagreement, where I believe, if I'm right, Dennett is on the side of artificial intelligence being impossible without intentionality. And by that, he means you need a motivation. It's not simply thinking and being and feeling, but you need a goal. I need to eat. I need to sleep. I need to fornicate. I need to express my power. I need to be creative.
Yeah.
And Pinker, on the other side, doesn't think that that's necessarily important. So it depends. And I think it's unknown and unknowable at this point what these AI sentient beings would do and feel and experience. So I'm not sure we could quite address that. But the nature of this conversation is to cut through the BS of AI. And it might be useful to get a little bit more pragmatic at this point and discuss the specific implications of what we're experiencing right now with the technology as it exists, as it's imminently going to come to bear. So consider things like the deep fakes. You've got the Drake Weekend hit that was created by Ghostwriter, who's basically a studio writer and engineer who put together a mix using artificial intelligence of two popular creative artists in a song that didn't exist, and it became a hit. All right. So it's already impacting the music industry in terms of copyright, in terms of monetization. Look at ChatGPT in terms of proprietary information, access to IP. Look at ChatGPT in terms of its implications for the health industry, in terms of a diagnostic tool for physicians, counselors, social workers, therapists. So the implications right now aren't necessarily earth-shattering in terms of destroying the world, but it's immediately and imminently transformative across virtually every vertical, every industry, right here, right now. And I think that these are the significant things to consider and talk about and sort out the BS and the reality of these. For example, the internet itself is likely to change. Right now, we go to search through Google and Bing primarily, right? And we access websites. We get lists of prioritized websites that match our search. It's going away. We're probably each going to have our own little personal chatbot, and search and data and access to services are all going to be unified in a single application, which will learn about us, understand our preferences, and to Jay's point, potentially be tremendously violative in terms of what it knows about us and the limited amount of information it provides based on the self-interest of the people providing the information. This is the transformative nature of air quote artificial intelligence at this moment in time. And it's absolutely revolutionary. That's what people are mostly freaking out about.
Yes.
Which is the relinquishment of control, right? And the prioritization of certain content, certain services over others.
Yeah.
And that's what I think we should talk about in terms of like what's real and what's BS. Is this actually happening? Are we going to reach the point where we can't tell the difference in content, whether it's a movie, a TV show, a song, a piece of content that we ingest, between what's air quote artificially generated and human created? And my answer to that was within only a couple of years, not only are we going to not know the difference, but we're not even going to care.
Yeah.
And that hits Jay's point,
Yeah.
which is like, it's important if we make it important. And it's based on our values, which is like, do we want to be autonomous? Do we want to be independent? Or do we want to give ourselves, in a sense, to the bots? And that's what this whole conversation, in a sense, is about, right?
Standing ovation for Mookie. I agreed with every word. It should be on a poster. And I just like to the questioner's point about the conscious thing. And I agree. I think that's part. I don't want to disparage it. It's cutting through the BS. It's a really interesting conversation. It's a different philosophical one that I just want to put it on the table. We don't even have a theory of consciousness to like answer the question or even,
we don't know.
We utterly don't know. But the one thing we do know, and this is not a divergence, it's to your point. The one thing we do know, this is a very Gary Marcus point and a Steven Pinker point you also mentioned, is that the only system in the entire universe that we've ever come across that has GI, get rid of the A, it's natural general intelligence, as it were, is humans. I'm sure we're not the only ones, but we're the only ones that we know of. And I agree with you, Mookie, it's substrate independence, nothing special about my wetware as a human that makes it so. But this arrangement of physical things is producing this thing that we call general intelligence. It exhibits it, it inhabits it, and it has a history, a trail that led to it, happens to be through evolution that got us to this. That entire crazy mechanism is totally replicable, to your point, in a synthetic world. But, and this is the important point, to the questioner's point, it is not at all the process physically or historically or anything that these machines are using. Are they having some sort of weird computer version of consciousness? I have no idea, but that's just as crazy a sentence as it was a million years ago as it is to say today, even though we have ChatGPT. And that is, again, it's I don't want to disparage it as a BS question. It's a good question, but it should not be at all our concern, because it's not going to materialize. And that's my guess because of philosophical and reasons about the nature of intelligence. But all the stuff you did just say, you said within a couple of years. I think it's quicker than that. That where, you know, and just to borrow the one point again from Tristan Harris that I think they made really well is like, I don't know how far we are into the social media experiment as a species. It was a thing that just happened, and it integrated itself into such political structures and social structures of society that now if we decide we want to undo it or there's a problem with it, it's almost undoable it's so intertwined that it's hard to imagine the steps to undo it. And I think rightfully so, and maybe this conversation is a tiny part of that, is we do get to have we should have the conversation now of like, before it gets integrated into everything. It's probably already too late, to your point, Mookie. You know, what should we do? Because there are foreseeable dangers here that are very familiar, that we've just done. And we're just going to, it seems like we're just going to repeat them again. Can you imagine Congress or, legitimately regulating or pulling apart the threads of social media? No, because they all get elected via the mechanisms of social media. And so, that's just one little example to put out there. But I agree with everything Mookie said. Yeah. And the siren.
Yeah. Can I add one thing again, grounding us a little bit? Barry Diller. Remember Barry Diller, who was I think he was the Ask Jeeves guy, and he was the agent to the stars. All right. Barry Diller had an interesting observation recently, which is, I think, relevant to this conversation and kind of grounds it. When the internet first came out, no one knew what the hell it was. And as a consequence of that, everything was free. And as a consequence of that, it utterly decimated entire industries, principally the publishing one. Okay. So as a writer, I'm very much aware of the fact that my content has limited value from a monetization point of view, because people are used to getting it for free. Now you've got the bots. Okay. And as I mentioned, websites, and I'm going to repeat this again, websites are going away, folks. The very backbone of the internet and how we've been using it since Berners-Lee did HTML, right, is going away. And the reason for that is we're going to get all our information through our personal bot. And if that's the case, there's a new opportunity and a new paradigm for intellectual property and the bots gaining access, aggregating, and utilizing content. So when we're talking about the future and we're talking about measures and countermeasures, how to balance things out, there's a silver lining to a lot of this in terms of the value of content, its sourcing, and how it's going to be accessible to users, to your point, in the imminent future. And I bring that up to a point to illustrate that we're not helpless in all of this, and that there's huge benefits to a transformation like this, with the caveat, to your point, Jay, that we've been here before. We know what happens in disruptive change. We know what happens, especially technologically, when people don't understand the channel. And based on our learnings and our prior experience, there's an opportunity to do this all over again and do it in a better way. Does that make any sense? Which is, you see where I'm at? Which is,
I'm with you.
The internet annihilated the value of things that we held dear. And now that we have this epic paradigm shift in terms of how information is going to be shared and disseminated and processed by everybody, we get a chance to redefine and re-engineer that model. And I think that's thrilling. I think it's exciting. And I think it holds a tremendous opportunity for society to learn from its mistakes and do it better and do it more efficiently.
So you're talking about disrupting of, like the economic and financial aspects of it. So I have another question here. It says reliance on AI is so easy if we get addicted to using it, which we probably will. I mean, it'll become a need eventually, like the internet is. And it's feeding into big data what happens when the charges to use it become a monopoly? So it wasn't just that there were entire industries that were decimated. There were also entire sort of industries that were created. You have these sort of these monsters, right? These companies that are just essentially a monopoly. I mean, even the definition of monopoly has kind of become blurry now since all these things happen. So how does that become advanced further with AI?
Well, consider the end user, right? Like, what am I willing to pay for, and what's pragmatically expedient for me?
Yeah.
Back to advertising. Think about the sellers, the people who have content, products, and services that they want to get in front of my face, right? It has to reach some kind of equilibrium or balance between my ability and willingness to pay for something and those who provide it to me. And if nothing else, this personalized bot model creates unique opportunities in terms of micro personalization. These bots will have access to my biometrics. They'll know what I'm eating and where I'm at. They know who I'm associating with. They know most of my preferences. They'll therefore have a unique opportunity to provide me information, products, and services that are uniquely tuned to my needs, my desires, and my ability to pay for them.
Yeah.
Now, it's violative in ways, sure, but it's also eminently practical, convenient, expedient, and has a possibility of elevating my quality of life considerably. Right now, our experience on an iPhone is analogous to yahoo.com in 1998. We've got dozens of apps. We go from one to the other. We use separate services to order a car, order a food, find information, schedule a business appointment, communicate with our friends, be on social media. Imagine a singular application, which is probably voice-driven, which responds to each and every command that I have across the full spectrum of my needs throughout my life. Now, on the one hand, that's Big Brother, right? They know everything about me and they can control me. But for decades, we've sacrificed privacy and our own control for convenience and expediency. And that's going to be exponentially elevated with this bot revolution, for both better and for worse. And lastly, it's going to be inevitable, folks. There's no governmental control that you could really realistically put on this to rein it in. In that sense, it's analogous to genetic engineering, CRISPR. We can now really edit the DNA strand down to the individual nucleoside pair, all right? We could engineer anybody and anything that we want, and we're going to. So let's cut the bullshit and figure that we could rein this in. We cannot. And my final point is that's not necessarily a bad thing. It'll play itself out. And I think overall, it'll be net positive to our species. That's just my fairly libertarian point of view.
So all of these things that you're talking about, all of the advantages, I just want to ask you, I mean, I know you said you're Pollyanna about this, but do you understand like why a lot of people aren't the same tools that we had from whether it's Google or social media or what have you, when they got into the hands of the bad guys or people who wanted to this sort of malicious people,
right?
They've been able to.
Or the libertarians. Sorry, just putting that in there.
Yeah, libertarians. Yeah, so they've been
because that's what I actually worry. That's what I actually worry about here. Yeah.
Yeah. So we went from you had nuclear bombs and whoever had it, they could cause sort of physical destruction. A lot of it was just about, and then you have sort of cyber crime, you have cyber terrorism, you've got financial, like economic, everything's online. So you've got the economic terrorism and crime, large scale. So what does that look like with this new technology, the negative side of it?
You want my opinion, or we go back to?
No, I'm just asking you because I'm curious to know what you think. Because
I think it's going to be exponentially good and bad. It's going to be both.
I see the exponentially good side, but
Yeah.
But because the thing is, usually when you have people who regulate it, there's a sort of a conscience, like you said. It's what we make of it. It's our values, right? So we use our values to do the good stuff, and then the people who don't, the people who are kind of operating the sort of malicious people, they tend to not be playing by the same rules. They don't have the same sort of regulatory guardrails that we do. Yet, the good tends to keep winning. Right. So, I mean, this is sort of like a philosophical question coming from a non-philosopher. But when you have the bad stuff, right? You said it would be exponentially bad. And what does that look like? What do you think? Because, you have an idea of, you're talking about how transformative it's going to be in terms of its benefits. But what do you see at this point? Like, we're not talking, forget about the whole, AI taking over and everything. But at this point, you're saying we're talking about the practical, pragmatic implications of it right now. And you're talking about the positives. What are the negatives?
Well, it'll just exacerbate the mechanisms of control. Mm-hmm. And control can come from a centralized authoritarian regime, or control can come from a monopolistic, capitalist, plutocratic clusterfuck. So it could come from either direction, and it will come from both. So there's a lot of downside to all of this. Anytime you relinquish control for the sake of convenience, expediency, and the ostensible feeling that you're improving your quality of life, you're exposing yourself to manipulation. And that's simply going to increase. My Pollyanna outlook is that for every force, there's a counterforce. And it's going to ebb and flow, and there are going to be amazing opportunities for humanity to balance itself out. And that's not just wishful thinking, but it's proven evident throughout the course of history. I do like Steven Pinker's view that the overall level of quality of life throughout the world, economically, with regard to health, education, is steadily improving. And although it's got some hot spots, we've got horrible situations in Sudan, Ukraine. You can isolate areas where humanity is truly suffering on a macro and a micro level. The overall statistical quality of life for the human being now compared to 20, 40, 60, 80 years ago has been steadily improving. And I would be so bold as to say that this AI revolution will boost it, will help facilitate that trajectory in terms of making mundane tasks more convenient, making jobs better, more elevated, and making all of our lives improved in terms of just taking the everyday grunt work out of so many things that we do. And we just need to be careful. That's all. And we need to be vigilant and focused. But I like what's happening.
Yeah. So you talked earlier about relinquishing control, and I think that really is the basis for why people are freaking out about this. I don't think they've felt like a relinquishing of control. Maybe with robotics and automation of jobs and things like that to some extent, but with most other technological advancements, they haven't really felt like they're really losing complete control. So I don't know, Jay, did you want to sort of?
I mean, I have a lot to respond with, but I've been.
You were shaking your head when you talked about Steven Pinker.
Yeah, but it's honestly, I have a book in me that's I'm sure years away, but it's become increasingly more difficult for me to have these kinds of conversations from a philosophical perspective because of it just sounds so foreign to people. I'll give you like the punchline of it that it just won't land because I don't want to lay out the full argument. But that consequentialism is not a moral philosophy, and libertarianism is the political and economic manifestation of consequentialism. But the language of consequentialism as a moral philosophy, Mookie's used the word net good, positive this, positive that, Steven Pinker graphs. And this is actually really my deep philosophical fear. I totally agree with him that those are going to continue and probably accelerate in the right direction. But as a nugget of like why it's difficult to have these conversations. And again, to finish my punchline, if anybody wants to follow me for years and wait for the book for me to actually write it, we really desperately need a case for virtue ethics in a secular world, which we haven't had since the Enlightenment. It used to be very popular back in Plato and Socrates' day. Religion has owned the language of virtue ethics, and we've been stuck in this very stupid, even in politics, fight between consequentialism and deontology for millennia now, and it's garbage. And we need a new paradigm, but we don't have it, and that's part of the system that I think that is the system in which this technology is now surfacing, and ironically, which this technology was found by adopting very aggressively. So fine. So all that being said, if it sounds like gobbledygook to people, that's fine for now. But it's just like it's sort of just a challenge to it. If people know the movie WALL-E, it's Pixar, you guys have seen it, right? They're in the spaceship going around and everybody's fat and very happy and everything's being fed to them. The Pinker graphs are off the charts in WALL-E. The Pinker graphs it's a utopia on WALL-E. Those Pinker graphs are perfect. There is no infant mortality. There's not a drop of starvation. There's not a drop of poverty, right? Great. Would the consequentialists, how would they answer this? And yes, they try to always get out of it with the language of consequentialism, of like the psychological whatever. You try to put this on there. But it's an interesting thought experiment. It's a fantastic movie. And I think we're going to see more and more pieces of fiction and science fiction like Her and like WALL-E and the Huxley stuff, at least in the West, as being the fear of where we're going to. So I didn't want to respond point by point to all of these kinds of things, but Mookie and I have agreed a lot on the details of it, but seem to be disagreeing. And it's the very defense of it that I agree with that is actually causing my fear on a whole different level. Like this, I'll just use the term because it's what's being labeled as, but this AI revolution, this ChatGPT revolution, this, there's someone actually I put in the Sam episode on AI, if anybody listens to it, Alison Gopnik, who argued that they should be called statistical inference from large data sets, which doesn't come off the tongue very well. And this was like years ago, because that's what this trick is. That's what you're actually seeing is statistical inference from large data sets. And the data sets have gotten huge. Like it's just scraping everything that we put out there. And its big breakthrough for one of the little technological things was to discover that the best data set it could possibly use was just language, because every word could be quantized as a piece of language. And then there was a word before it and after that. It was already tagged. So you don't need a human to tag the data the way that old machine learning did. If people are familiar with that, where every time you do a CAPTCHA, when you have to like click on the light posts or whatever, you're making part of a data set and you're the human tagging it so it knows what quadrant the thing is. This thing doesn't need that because the dictionary and Wikipedia and every website and every book that it's reading is already tagged data, basically, because every word is basically a piece of tagged data. Pretty brilliant idea and breakthrough, and they've been able to obviously use this for good. That thing is going to like solve climate change, right? And it's going to solve all kinds of cancers, and because it's just too much. It's a lot of data to synthesize, and you can get great breakthroughs of, the data that's already there in the world that no human has quite put two and two together in order to make the nano robots that clean the carbon from the atmosphere, or whatever the solution might look like. This technology will be drastically helpful for that. So the Pinker graphs and all that are going to go in the tremendously right direction. So I just wanted to put that out there as this.
All right. So it sounds like we're in violent agreement as to the benefits and the risks of this thing.
Absolutely.
So we relinquish control, but in exchange for that, you've got these machine learning, algorithm driven, token based, associative, probabilistic, language driven engines that are going to analyze the shit out of terabytes of data that an individual human could never process, with the end result of curing cancer, extending our lives by 100 years, eliminating poverty, ensuring that everyone is well.
I think that's going a little too far, but yeah.
Well, I think so. And then eventually, populating the solar system, expanding the human race. So my point is,
so we're not in violent agreement. We're not in violent agreement. Put that.
I
don't co-sign that one.
I don't think you can't.
I don't think
you're
the
talking about
world is as bad as you're making it. And I'm also saying it's inevitable. If you want to go to a philosophical retreat in Vermont, okay, and read Walt Whitman, you can do it in 2023 and you can do it in 2500. It doesn't matter. And that indefatigable spirit of human diversity and kind of tribalistic interest is never going to go away. You're always going to have folks who are technology driven, progress driven, materialistic, and you're always going to have people who are more air quote value driven and holistic. And all that this does is it gives people more opportunities to make decisions, and it gives humanity overall the next generation, the next level of technological sophistication to populate the the I mean, this shit is great. And I think we need to embrace it, and we need to leave on
we have to cut at this point. Right, we have to cut the mic because you've gone to, and what I think is interesting is that the thing we agree on, that the Bostroms of the world and Tegmarks to this point, and again, we could talk about the mistake they're making, that they fear we're creating this super intelligent creature or we're on our way to doing it. And they always ask this question. They always ask, how would you deal with something that was smarter than you in front of you with different values that weren't aligned? And it's a good question, but it's a science fiction question because this thing won't make values. And we could talk about that.
It might,
but
it might.
No, it won't. It won't. It will appear to. It will appear to.
No different, Jay. It'll be no different than we do.
It'll be no different from the perception, and this is the big point.
It'll be the thing.
Okay.
Eventually, it'll be the thing.
All right.
Okay. So we're not on that path, but let me. So what you just heard Mookie do with the populating the galaxy and curing poverty and all this kind of stuff.
Rah rah rah.
Right. It's funny, it's cute, but it's a problem because what you want is a God in a box too. It's funny, like the people who are afraid of this thing being a God in the box and coming to crush us, and the people who just gave the diatribe that you did of that it's going to like populate the galaxy. Not coming, ladies and gentlemen. He doesn't exist, and we're not making him in this thing. It's up to us. It's a human problem. So the stuff when you talk about that this, nothing changes about condition when this comes in, what we need to be talking about. This is not a God, and it doesn't fix these things. It's still a tool. It's almost like if the first thing I laid out of this gradient of intelligence, which is fundamentally flawed if you're a Deutschian like me, but even if you just buy it, the place to put the kind of thing that we can create is actually just below us. And in a weird way, Gary Marcus, who would be in violent agreement with most of what I said on here, really did give your pitch of like the personal assistant who's your friend and you talk to is actually what he wants. But he wants it to be humanistic, and it's a philosophical and moral philosophical problem. We are not going to escape ourselves, even with this thing. And we're stuck with politics, and we're stuck. So when I chimed in, when you said about curing poverty, no, that's the kind of thing. Poverty is not a problem of technology. Problem is a problem of psychology, philosophy, politics, history, all these very complicated things. That shit's not going away. Yes. And it's going to get disrupted, but that's the stuff we can't absolve ourselves of the Sisyphean problem of pushing the stone up the proverbial hill of becoming a human and becoming a person and becoming a society if we want to be.
The way you posit this, Jay, is that they're mutually exclusive. And here's where I disagree. Right. I think that you could have this inexorable and inevitable evolution of technology, of which a major milestone is this artificial intelligence revolution. And you could retain your good old-fashioned human values. And they're not necessarily at odds with each other. Because
so why did you?
Again, to your point, these are just tools. These are just tools.
Why did you answer? But why did you answer the question in the affirmative that there's a point where manipulation can become too effective? I thought you conceded the point that it's possible to cross a precipice from
in ways we already have. But it's not terminal. Okay, it's not existential. It's
not existential. We agree on that. I feel like I'm being.
How can you? The thing that you're talking about the relinquishing control. So you're talking about on the one hand you're relinquishing control. On the other hand, there's all of this other stuff. Just sounds like liberation. It sounds like us sort of going beyond our limits, and it's the opposite of relinquishing control in a way. So that's why it seems a little.
Guys, it doesn't. This to me, I'm befuddled by this because it seems to be a zero-sum game. And let me be banal about this. Facebook, you can connect up with your friends from high school. You can post pictures of cats, and arguably it's improved some people's lives. At the same time, it's engendered genocide, in some countries, right? It's facilitated that. So how would you define Facebook? Is it good? Is it bad? It's both. All of
but it's not existential. It's not. So yeah. So
it's both.
So like yes. So none of us. But what is this stronger than Facebook, et cetera? Of course, it's both. Yeah. Of course, it's both. Which is why we want to have this conversation of like, there's a lot of crazy Pollyanna stuff.
Sorry, Jay, you're getting
world
chopped.
Stuff, which are making a fundamental mistake. Of course, it's both. We're not trying. I don't know if we're trying to whether it's good or bad or take a vote in this conversation. That's I didn't want to do this, but I quit social media and I was on Facebook for this project, which is terrible. That it's again so intertwined and ingrained in society that it's quite hard to actually leave it. But I don't post the way I used to very frequently. And when I posted about this, and I hate to do this, Mookie misunderstood me so badly and came in with such vitriol into my thing. And I know it's just joking around, but dude, that is Tristan Harris saying our first encounter with AI was that. And I was like, I want to have this conversation now, because that is what, like, someone who knows me, and I've written a ton about this and tried to write very carefully in this one dumb post. I was reminded of like, no, this is terrible. And that's Facebook. That's just Facebook and social media. That's the first contact with this kind of algorithm. And I think Yuval Harari put it well, because about this control, he said, we're handing the keys of civilization over to this thing. I think that's a good way to put it about control. It's not going to drive us off a cliff, but we certainly are.
That is a good
we certainly are subjecting ourselves to something that is much, much stronger than the last version of it, much more manipulative, more aggressive. Because, like, to one of your earlier questions, Ali, about like, why is this different, or what's different about this, is almost your very first question of like, how people react so crazily when they ask it the first question. And there are, psychological truths about the human condition, psychological truths about who we are, that are, through the process of evolution, because that's where it all comes from, vulnerable to this kind of manipulation and magic wand waving and everything else. And so there, and that is what is exploited and exploitable using this kind of interface. It's the same information that Google used to give you, but with an interface that synthesizes it in such a way that suddenly you're like, oh my God, it's alive and someone's talking to me. And that's creepy, because this thing is just a chatbot, right?
We're going to get over that, though. Okay, so when Sir Walter Raleigh, I think, brought tobacco to England for the first time, and he lit up, there's this apocryphal story that his servant poured water on his head because he thought his head was on fire. when the first motion picture, that they shared with people in a theater, it was a locomotive heading toward the screen, and people literally jumped out of their seats and ran out of the theater because they thought it was the real thing. Every single example of a radical new experience for human beings have freaked us the fuck out. And the more powerful, the more visceral this experience engendered by technology or even societal change, the more intense that reaction. Everything that we're talking about now in terms of the risks and problems of AI are directly proportional to its potential benefits and overall capabilities. The more powerful the revolution, the more intense and visceral the reaction. And this has to do with the emotional response that we're talking about, but also the apprehension about its risks.
Mhm.
And I think we're resilient as a species, and we're not the first species to go through this, all right? So maybe you believe in the Fermi paradox, that genetic engineering and maybe even AI are the signature milestones for the eventual destruction of a civilization. But I tend to think that not only is all this inevitable, but it's net beneficial, and we're going to get over it, we're going to conquer it, and we're going to utilize it. So I'm not getting from this conversation anything that makes me feel otherwise, because a lot of this is philosophical abstraction. And every time you tell me that it's violative in terms of our inherent values as human beings, I'm not getting the specificity to make me believe that. Because, you know, you paint like a picture of a Wall-E future. Well, maybe a lot of us might enjoy floating around fat in armchairs on a spaceship, but there'll be a lot of us who will be ice fishing on some remote moon of some gas giant and reading poetry to each other. I think that it's not that horrific, and I don't even think it's that threatening.
Can I give you I'll try to make it more concrete. And I mean, you see, I agree with you a ton when you talk, and then the ending, I'm like, I'm not saying it's because at the end, I'm like, no one said existential.
We got to wrap up in 10 minutes. So
all right.
10 minutes.
Yeah.
Well, I think this point is important because, to try to like address some of your, like maybe what you're not hearing, I think there's a tremendous opportunity here with this stuff if we do this right. And the opportunity, I do think, is psychological and philosophical. So I think that's where the conversation needs to go. I agree with you. The technology is going to do what it's going to do. The political socioeconomic system that it's arriving in is what it's arriving in, like it or not. I don't like it, but here we are. But what we get to do is talk about things like what we want to want. This is the Yuval Harari point. So as an example that's concrete and I think really good is we've referenced a lot of people, a friend of mine from New York, Seth Stevens-DeWittowitz. He wrote a book called Everybody Lies. It's fantastic. I wonder what he's working on with this now. This book was pre-ChatGPT. He was a Google developer, and he basically just got or access to the data to everything, like Google data sets, Google searches, a lot of Pornhub stuff, Facebook stuff. And this was a little bit earlier data when people weren't quite, basically he called your Google search bar like digital truth serum, right? Like you basically looked for stuff in there. And so you could find a lot of, interesting data about what people were really looking up. Some of it very actionable stuff that is good to know. Like as a concrete example, during the downturn of the 2008 recession, people were worried that child abuse was going to go up. But for some reason, the data wasn't showing it. Like these calls weren't being made, and everyone's like, oh, maybe people are just working together. But the Google searches for why did daddy just hit me, or why is daddy hitting me, you could track because people were searching it, and you could map it on a map, and it was spiking in all of the places where you were hit the hardest. Things like that. Really interesting data. Again, really actionable. What people searched for in Google before they attempted suicide. Really interesting, important, potentially life-saving pieces of data. This is a very old thing. But when it comes to something else, those are interesting, good examples about kind of our behavior and values and the kind of people we want to be. Here's this really good chapter that I think ought to be challenging for libertarians and capitalists. And it's a chapter about great companies thriving and becoming great companies, big companies, by knowing secrets that you can find in the data. So for example, when Facebook launched their news feed, which was an algorithm, I think at first, the first version, it was just called like your wall. And there was no algorithm behind it. It was just the people you followed. And it was, the initial sort of innocent little thing of like, oh, follow your friends, and it's chronological. And then they launched this thing called newsfeed, and there'd be some ads in it, and it would sort of push the algorithm, and you'd see some people you don't follow. It's your friends of your friends, whatever it is. They didn't want to give away their secret sauce. Everybody pretty much panned it and said, we hate this thing, right? Like, this is terrible and it's voyeuristic, and why should I need to know this stuff? And I hate this person's opinion. Why are you showing it to me? But Mark Zuckerberg sits back there and he has the data and sees everybody clicking on it like crazy, right? Or as like a mundane example, everybody claims, the amount of people who claim that they read like the Atlantic and the Wall Street Journal and whatever, it's through the roof. But the real data shows that like sales for tabloids and crummy magazines or whatever it is are actually through the roof.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's why Nickelback sells out stadiums. Right?
Yeah, right. Everyone claims they just like, that's a funny one. But it would be like everyone says they love classical music, but you have their Spotify data and they're actually listening to whatever. So anyway, you get the point that he's making in this. And what do you do with that data? Well, there's one way to look at it, the sort of like agnostic, libertarian, non-moralistic, morality doesn't exist way to look at it, of like, well, their true intentions have been revealed, right? Like, this is what they really must want because that's what they're choosing in the privacy of their own Google search. And you could find depraved things, of course, like on Pornhub. So you have revealed intentions, revealed desires versus stated desires. And we live in a world where stated desires are invisible, do not matter because they don't make any money, right? Because you actually click on the thing. Mark Zuckerberg discovered this at Harvard when he made hotornot.com, and everyone probably said, this is the worst thing ever, you're so immoral, but everybody was in the dorms clicking on it like crazy. He discovered the secret a very long time ago. And okay, what do you do with that? Well, you have your stated desires and you have your actual behavior. And that's interesting. And I'll just put this out there of like, we live in a system that, again, is blind and invisible to stated intentions as much as they exist. But I think we have an opportunity to ask and we need to start asking the questions now of which of those things would we want to amplify? The people that we profess we want to be, and that's a very complicated thing, or the people that we're revealed to be in the privacy of our own shame and depravity or whatever kind of.
We may not even know. The revealed desires, a lot of times they're not even conscious. They're just things that
it's a very complex conversation. It's one that I'd love to have. Probably doesn't belong fully in this conversation, but it's where I do think the opportunity is, given the state of this. Because we all seem to be agreeing. We can, as much as we disagree, maybe some of the borders of those things, we agree that it's a tool. It's going to be used aggressively. Good things will happen. Bad things will happen. Whatever. Capitalists will do what they want. It's going into the system. What is it likely to amplify about the kind of people we are? I think that's the kind of opportunity that we have to question right now.
I think that's a whole different conversation, though, because I think it's Spitz. I understand. I think we were trying to have. I think Wookie wants to kind of more talk about the like you said, the pragmatic, like how is it going to be used right now in that perspective. And I think we're also, and Jay, you're going more into sort of if its effects on society and its implications for humanity and how we're going to evolve further and so on. So I think it feels sometimes like hearing you guys talk, it seems like there are two different conversations. It's two different places you guys want the conversation to go.
Well, I think it's useful in terms of having that dialectic because there's deep philosophical value-driven implications, just as there are pragmatic ones.
Right.
It's just a matter of prioritization, which in and of itself, as Nietzsche taught us, is a value. Right. So, to answer Jay's point about explicit and implicit statements of self and desire, I'll just cap it and maybe unify our points of view by saying a logical and almost inevitable result of this AI revolution might be the two becoming the same thing. Almost indistinguishable from each other. And then the last point on that, is that a good or bad thing?
Oh,
and that's the question, right? Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, I like you talk about Wall-E, but you mentioned Aldous Huxley a bunch of times, and the cool thing about Brave New World, the reason that's one of my favorite dystopias is within the dystopia, it's perfect. I mean, it's a utopia that is actually a dystopia to the outside observer. But anyway, we're gonna. I wanted to Maki Stan Gaki, great name. I was saying 20 more minutes, please. I'd like to hear more about ice fishing on a remote moon and reading poetry. I think it was a gasp. It's fun. We can't really do 20 more minutes, but I think we can do. Are you guys good to do about 5-7 minutes for questions that we have? We don't have a whole lot, but
I saw Brian Moore's comments, and I'm glad I think I have a fan in the room. He seems to be agreeing with me.
Yeah, so
glad someone hears it. Yeah.
Is this what you were talking about?
All three of them, yeah.
Data said it's a very democratic mirror to our present, underdeveloped value systems. I can see what you're talking about, the issue of creating a secular moral tradition that can permeate the data set these systems are using. So on that note, Jay, just this question from, I saw Sean, simple question. How do you guys see different religions coping up in the age of AI? I don't even know if it's a matter of coping or using it the way. Well, I mean, we've all seen what the religions do with technology, how they use them. So, but what do you see?
Oof.
I know there's a whole other topic, but I'm asking.
I mean, it's a really. I haven't thought of this question, so it's a really good one because I've been so adamant that it's not a God in a box and it's a mistake to think of it that way. But I don't know. I actually don't know how religions are going to cope up with it. You could ask it things right now. I mean, if I had to give you the honest answer, because I'm harping so much on like, listen, we're not going to escape the politics that we live in. The politics of religion are going to dictate the data set that each one is using. I don't know specifically how ChatGPT is working in China, but as far as I understand, this might be hearsay, but I think it's right. It doesn't know about Tiananmen Square, or you can't ask it about that. I'm quite certain that in the Muslim world, they're unlikely to, give you great answers about maybe not existential things. It's actually fairly interesting at pulling in philosophical conversations, but if you ask it about specific doctrines, I don't know.
That's very temporary though, because I think that, with the Muslims, the Islamic world kind of rode out the whole Enlightenment because they were able to control the printing press and its access, like how much of it enters the country, but they couldn't do that with the internet. The internet has been actually devastating, and social media has been devastating to just religion in general, but Islam in particular.
But this brings up a great and practical point about ChatGPT in the US of A. Elon Musk wants to start Truth GPT. And the reason he wants to do that is because of the inherent biases, which are self-evident in the results of ChatGPT. There's political leanings. There's a determination of what's acceptable and unacceptable communication. And these are decisions that are built into the engine. So the bias is already happening here. You don't need to look to China for Tiananmen Square. You don't need to go to the Middle East and have anything disparaging about Muhammad being extricated. ChatGPT already is selective about the type of content that it barfs back at you.
But
it's already happening, folks.
But a lot of that is actually it's been created. The people who created it have it's reflecting the biases of the people who've created it. But I mean, it's eventually going to, and it can potentially develop its own biases. I mean, if it's left sort of unchecked, we've seen all those experiments when it became, there was AI that became like a Nazi or like that. We've seen all that stuff too.
Well, that's one reason apparently that Google's using as an excuse for not launching it ahead of OpenAI. Yeah. So, the fact that it's erroneous information, I asked it to look up the history of medical device marketing, for example, for a conference that I recently did. It cited several timeline milestones in the development of the craft. I looked them up and several were fictional. They were probably in some kind of story or science fiction book. So again, erroneous.
It's also using Google. So AI is also doing things in Google. So.
Yeah. So again, it's misinformation is already prevalent within AI, and it's part of this conversation that goes back to intentional and unintentional manipulation, and that's never going to go away, folks. You know why? Because in every single human interaction and conversation, there's misinformation and manipulation. So, welcome to the real world, folks. It's a mess, but it's an interesting mess. And I think it's a mess that keeps getting more and more interesting. And frankly, in a kind of aggregate sense, better and better.
Yeah. I've had a couple of, sorry, Jay, just really quickly, I want to just bring up these Reza saying, why does Elon Musk want to silence AI's free speech? And Chat GPT will not show me the best picture of Muhammad.
Ooh, that's interesting. Yeah. It's probably true.
A quick question, then I'll get to what you were going to say, Jay, and then try to wrap this up. So one of the things that AI really brings out in people is imposter syndrome. There's a lot of people, I mean, so this is Zainab, she works with it a lot. She's been using it for a lot of her work. So how do you protect your intellectual worth while also using AI to power through work? So this is, I guess it falls into a sort of that relinquishing control thing too, right? In terms of if I can do this, then can't anybody else do this? Like, what's the point of me?
Yeah,
100%, and that's copyright problems too. I go back to the Drake fake, right? The studios are now leaping on this in terms of trying to keep their content proprietary because it's all about monetization. If any fool can get up there and create an Eminem song, or they just recreated a synthetic Beatles song from the Revolver era, using this technology, who owns it? Who disseminates it? Who profits from it? And lastly, to the point I made, in a very short period of time, people aren't going to care whether it's synthetic or real. It's not going to mean anything. And then the question becomes to the person asking this question, as a creator of original content, where does that put you? And the answer is, I don't know. And it's going to be kind of crazy and kind of a mess.
Well, hopefully we'll bring back Eddie Van Halen. I think that'll make you really happy. More Van Halen songs. But
yeah.
Jay, sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say that on that note, this is just one point people need to understand, that the content that GPT is accessing and these language models are aggregating and regurgitating are human created. So there was one interesting observation that it's going to run out of content. And we're going to reach a tipping point where the amount of content that we're interacting with that is created by artificial intelligence will exceed that which was originally created by humans. And that is going to be interesting.
Yeah, that's a really, I was actually, Zainab, who had that last question about the imposters, she sent me that article on the Atlantic. And
that, folks, is truly mind-blowing, where a majority of content that even the AIs are accessing is AI created. And that's where we enter the world of the meta, the meta reality, where it's it's an AI world. And we're subservient to it. So how's that for philosophical, value-driven?
Yeah, we don't even. Yeah, I think we wouldn't even care enough. But Jay, let's wrap this up. You wanted to say something before.
I mean, when you were talking, it's just like I know it's annoying but I think important, because language, which is what is at stake here, has to be really delicate around this. So in your answer, Ali, you said the word bias and that it would come up with its own biases. And it's just not, it's not bias in any sense of it is creating it or it is coming up with it. It doesn't comprehend what it's doing. It has no sort of source of self-reflection. I know this is the crazy part, is that people who are building this thing are already losing sight of this and being like, is it sentient, or I think it's getting AGI, or it's showing some sparks. And that's wild. I mean, we have to remember, it is possible to know how a magic trick is done and still be fooled by it. And it's just called misdirection. The guy's just really good at sleight of hand and you couldn't catch it when it happened and you're still baffled and you have that moment. And that, I mean, this is a really, really good magician, but it is, to Zainab's question, and I know I just hinted at it, if people are looking for like more people who are skeptical of this AGI Terminator thing and more interested in the psychological challenges, and I've mentioned David Deutsch a few times, he might give you some hope in his AI skepticism that creativity, genuine creativity, is a mysterious source. And I think, I think it was Brian also who put in a comment about moral codes and why this will wrap it up for me, because why I'm so concerned and in some moral philosophy and libertarianism is the boy of the pop that I live in, is you can't code morality, which is what consequentialism is to do. And you can't create genuine creativity. I agree with Mookie that we will cease to notice and cease to care about the difference. And that's a really interesting, philosophical, dangerous point, something that I would love to talk about like what really is art, what really is creativity. There's disruptions that are being overblown for like my, final thing. But those are that's where I think the opportunity, if I had more people in the room to talk about those things. Unfortunately, they're all on social media and they're already being hijacked by AI in the worst way. So it's hard to have these conversations. But those are the conversations that we have an opportunity to do, because we are facing something that is pulling off a magic trick that appears to be creative, appears to be comprehending, appears to be creating biases and have these things, but it's not. It's just a tool that humans created, and it's a really good magician. It's an interesting point, to Mookie's point. It's a cool, interesting opportunity for humans to be face-to-face with this kind of thing and maybe question what it means to be human in a philosophical, psychological way, while this tool can help clean up a lot of the messes like climate change and whatever else. Good and bad things will happen. So that's my hopeful, but like, I just wish we could have the reins of this conversation in the public and steer it more towards that. I think that's interesting, exciting, and where the real action is. And people should stop talking about God in a box scenarios and this is an existential threat, or this is going to save the world. It's not interesting, actually. It's not true, and it's not interesting.
Can I add one little poetic cap to this? Give me 2 minutes. Eric Topol illustrates the utilization of machine learning within the healthcare life science space. So male and females have different retinas in their head. So what they did was they showed 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 retinas to a computer, a machine learning piece of software, and they identified each retina as being that of a man or a woman. Now, a human being cannot tell the difference between a male and a female retina, or identify that a retina is from a man or a woman. We just can't do it. It's just this amoeba-like blob. Mm-hmm. And then after they ran 10, 20,000 retinas through the machine learning software, they presented a blank retina, not identified as male or female, to the program that had learned the difference. And 98% of the time, it was able to identify whether the retina was correctly associated with a man or a woman. Now, what's interesting and why I bring this up, to Jay's point, the machine learning algorithm and software that did this processing cannot speak, cannot express itself. So how it knows the difference between a male and a female retina remains unknown. The machine cannot communicate it to us, right? Yeah. So in a sense, it knows, it understands, but it does so in a way that we can't communicate and fathom. And I think that that's kind of interesting. It's almost poetic. And what we really need to come to understand is that artificial intelligence, in its remedial steps, and then as it becomes more and more sophisticated, will start doing things and experiencing the world in ways we can't quite understand or conceive of. And I think that that's really cool. And it holds tremendous potential, to Jay's point, about learning even more, not only about the technology, but about ourselves, what it means to be sentient, what it means to be conscious, and how emergent phenomena, much like the human mind and our capacity for interacting with the world, is its own thing. And I think that that's really pretty cool.
Yeah. I need to do this because I just agreed with almost every word in it, and I won't be long. But Brian Moore, if anyone's interested in why Mookie was just falling for a very old trap, is the Chinese room theory. You could look it up. It does not experience the world the way that in the Chinese room nobody knows Chinese. There it is. It's exactly right. it's an old one, and we've never faced something so powerful. This was, I think it was John Searle who came up with this thought experiment. And it was a guy in a room that had a translator machine with him, and you were on the other side of the room, and he was getting notes slipped under the door in Chinese. And he didn't know Chinese, but he had a machine behind him that he could give the card to, and it would translate Chinese, and he would slip the note under the door back the other way. And with someone on the other side of the door, know that no one would it think that someone in the room knew Chinese, and of course it would, even though no one in the room understands Chinese, can comprehend Chinese. I liked the example of the eye, because I thought you were going with it somewhere differently. It does not. This is why it's so delicate. And if people want to listen to Stuart Russell and Gary Marcus debate, Sam on his podcast hosted a pretty good one. It was recent, so it wasn't in my compilation. Although it wasn't great at the end with the philosophy stuff, but Gary did this a lot, where he would have to jump in when Stuart was talking, being like, it's not thinking, it's not comprehending, right? But it's so delicate that it is not experiencing, and it does not know. I got your point that we lose language here because we've never encountered something like this. And it's just like, I don't know. I even asked ChatGPT, being like, what do you think about when I say that you're thinking or you know stuff? And it has interesting answers. It does, it's like, well, that's the language that we have for kind of what I'm doing. But it doesn't comprehend, it doesn't know. And that's interesting and important, but it is so easy to lose sight of on the other side of it. And with the thing that we've agreed vehemently with is that we will cease to care. And in much sooner than 3 years or whatever you predicted, we probably already ceased to care. And that's interesting. And we should talk about what that disruption is, not for society, maybe so, but for our own selves and our own sense of humanity. The machine does not experience anything, and it can find eyes. It does not know what an eye is, and it does not know why the question matters.
It's not just about the fact that it can't express to you how it does it. It's the fact that it doesn't know itself how it does it. It has no idea that.
I get the difference, folks. I'm not saying that the machine learning algorithm software is sentient or conscious. I'm merely illustrating that there's different expressions of knowledge and even air quote experience that we don't need to denigrate, and that could be very revelatory in terms of how we ourselves experience each other in the world. That's all I'm saying. There's a lot that we don't know.
Yeah, there's a lot to talk about too. I mean, I actually wanted to get into this George Hinton, the university, the guy at Google who quit, the godfather of AI, the grandfather of AI, I think he is, the godfather of AI. So he quit, and he said there's danger ahead. He quit Google. He was at the University of Toronto. Actually, Zainab worked with him as well, if I'm not mistaken. But he's got some interesting ideas about it too. But I think that we should, there's just a lot more to talk about. I think that maybe.
Anyway, thanks for including me. Thanks for the discussion. I think that these diverse and divergent opinions are what drives a good conversation. So
Yeah. But I think it'd be kind of cool to talk about just specifically about the bias aspect is very interesting. Whether that comes from whether it's inherent or whether it's built into it, how that's going to evolve over time. There's many aspects of it that are kind of interesting. I feel like this is even though we're trying to think about this very broadly, I just feel like we're not fully comprehending whether it's from a pragmatic perspective or from a philosophical perspective. I just don't think we have right now enough to comprehend where it's going to go and how it's going to go. It's because some things just are truly unprecedented. Anytime you have something new that comes up, you always have this has happened before. We've had books, we had calculators, we had Google, we had social media, but now we've got AI. But sometimes things are also unprecedented. They may have one quality, two qualities, sometimes maybe just one that would just completely set it apart and to take it in a different direction.
I think that just makes it even more exciting, and
it does make it exciting,
potentially beneficial. I think I love this stuff.
It is exciting, but there's also disaster porn, right? I mean, they call it porn for seconds. For a reason, because it's it's something that people they do get a sense of excitement from things that can be potentially apocalyptic. There's a reason all these sort of zombie apocalypse movies are so it's the revealed desire of people.
Yeah, people really want some shit to go down. I think that's the truth, which is fun.
Yeah.
Which is
What was it? I think Montaigne said that most human problems come from people being unable to sit still in a room for more than 2 minutes.
Yes.
So I think that's it.
Yeah, just don't want to get
fantastic. There's a fantastic book called Why We Are Restless.
Yeah. And you could probably tell I'm holding this thing in my hand and it's been shaking the whole time.
Yeah, it's by Ben and Jennifer Story. They're fantastically. It's an awesome book about Montaigne, and that's the fun stuff. But last thing, history can help. There's always an analogy. There's always new things, but it's just such an overblown and overused point. That's why I came in so strong against it. Because before there was a TV, there was no TV. Right, like it changed things. Right, there was things like it. Oh, we had shadow puppets, and they were doing puppets on. Yeah, of course. There's not like we're humans, and we reinvent new things that we sort of have some familiarity or desire for in some degree, I suppose. But before there was a TV, there was no TV. And if you went back in time and somebody was on a news show and said something like the TV is really going to change things and politics are going to be totally changed and like politicians won't have to speak anymore and they're going to have to wear makeup, they'd be like, oh, you're crazy. It's exactly what happened, right? The TV changed things. So things change things, and it's worth talking.
But my last point though is people don't really, and I'm very much not only a libertarian in bent, but a social Darwinian. And to see your TV analogy, the Icelandic language has changed so little that Leif Erikson, if you bring him forward in time and would watch a TV show, he'd understand almost every word. So some things they ain't ever gonna change. And that's true even throughout this AI revolution. We're gonna be fine.
That goes for also making our last points. That's never gonna. That's just gonna keep on going on. So after that last point, on any of us wanted to say anyway. I just want to thank everybody for joining us. If you actually paid attention to this, and it was good. It was fun. It was a little choppy and everything. I'll see what I can do about the edit, but. Let's see. I think this was a good start. This was a lot of fun. Let's get together.
All right. Well, thanks guys for inviting me, and I enjoy this kind of stuff.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.
All right. Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Okay. Bye.
I'm gonna end the broadcast now.
Yeah.